The string quartet was playing something light and classical, the notes weaving through the gentle hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses. I stood near the grand fireplace in my son David's impeccably decorated home, a glass of sparkling water in my hand. The room was a sea of modern, expensive casual wear, soft knits, designer jeans, blazers thrown over shoulders. And then there was me. I was wearing my armor. The charcoal grey wool of my three-piece suit felt like a second skin, a familiar and comforting weight. I'd chosen it for today, for my son's 40th birthday, not as a statement but as a quiet tribute. The fabric, a Super 150 from a mill in Biella that had long since closed, was soft as thistle down against my wrists. The cut, a masterpiece of suppressed waist and a gently roped sleeve head, moved with me, not against me. It was the last suit I'd ever made with my own hands, the final garment I'd painstakingly constructed under the watchful, critical eye of Gianluca himself. Every stitch held a memory. The scent of beeswax and chalk dust seemed to rise from the wool. If I breathed in deeply enough, I was watching David laugh with some of his college friends, my chest swelling with a quiet paternal pride when I felt the shift in the air around me. It was Chloe, my daughter-in-law, cutting a path through the guests with two of her acolytes in tow. They were a trio of polished, sharp-edged women, all dressed in the kind of aggressively trendy, logo-splashed attire that Chloe's lifestyle brand peddled. She called it curated living. I called it noise. She descended upon me with a saccharine smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "There you are, Dad. We were just admiring your outfit." Her voice was a little too loud, calibrated to carry over the quartet. To draw the attention of those standing nearby, I simply gave a small, polite nod. "Chloe, it's a lovely party." "Oh, it is, isn't it?" she chirped, her gaze raking over me from head to toe with a theatrical slowness. She reached out and actually pinched the fabric of my sleeve between her thumb and forefinger, a gesture of such profound disrespect in my world that it took every ounce of my composure not to flinch. Her friends watched, their faces masks of vapid curiosity. She released the fabric with a dismissive little flick of her wrist. "Oh, Dad, bless you," she said, her voice dripping with a condescension so thick you could spread it on toast. The room seemed to hush a fraction, ears tuning into the unfolding drama. "The cut is so yesterday, so boxy. And this fabric," she continued, leaning in conspiratorially to her friends but not lowering her voice 1 decibel. "It looks a bit cheap, doesn't it? Like something from one of those discount warehouses." One of her friends, a woman with hair the color of strained carrots, let out a little titter, quickly covering her mouth with her hand. The other just smirked. My heart wasn't pounding. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a cold, still shock, like plunging into an icy lake. I felt the eyes of a dozen guests upon me. I saw my son glance over, a faint line of confusion on his brow. Chloe placed a patronizing hand on my arm. "You really should let me take you shopping. We can get you into something more modern, something that flatters you. We can't have you looking like a relic at these events, now can we?" The word hung in the air. Relic. It wasn't the insult to me, Arthur, the 72-year-old man. I had weathered far worse. It was the desecration. She was standing there in her mass-produced, overpriced finery, publicly spitting on a legacy she couldn't begin to comprehend. She was mocking the thousands of hours of labor, the sacred geometry of a perfect dart, the whisper-soft roll of a hand-padded lapel. She was ridiculing the memory of Gianluca's voice, his exacting standards, the way he would run his hand over a finished garment and give a single slow nod of approval, a nod that felt like a knighthood. In that moment, the pleasant hum of the party faded into a dull roar in my ears. The spark wasn't lit by rage, but by a profound, chilling clarity. This was not a simple difference of opinion. This was a declaration of war on my dignity, waged on a battlefield she believed she owned. She saw a harmless old man in an old-fashioned suit. She had no idea she was looking at a master craftsman, or that the armor she so flippantly dismissed was in fact impregnable. The public humiliation was the spark, yes. But as I stood there absorbing her sneering smile and the titters of her sycophants, I felt the first cold ember of a long-dormant fire begin to glow in the depths of my soul. The lion wasn't just awake, he was remembering what it felt like to hunt. To my family, I am just Arthur, Dad, Grandpa, a 72-year-old man who putters in his garden, reads historical biographies, and enjoys a quiet cup of tea in the afternoon. They see the comfortable sweaters, the sensible shoes, the man who seems content with the slow, gentle rhythm of a life largely lived. They see a relic, I suppose, though they'd never used the word so crudely, not to my face at least. They see a simple man with simple, perhaps dated, tastes, and I have let them see that. It is the easiest role I have ever played. They know Eleanor, they know the love of my life, the woman who pulled me from one world and anchored me firmly, blessedly in another. They know the 35 years of marriage, the quiet dinners, the hand-holding on the porch swing. They know the grief that settled in after she left us, a hollow space in the house that I've learned to live around, like a familiar piece of furniture that's no longer there. They believe my life began with her, and in so many ways it did, but it did not start with her. They know nothing of the boy I was before. They know nothing of Milan. My father was a craftsman. His hands were his life. He could feel the soul of a fabric just by holding it between his thumb and forefinger. He worked for Gianluca Valenti, il maestro, the most revered, most secretive tailor of his generation. Our small apartment was always filled with the scent of wool and beeswax, a fine dusting of chalk on every surface. I didn't have a childhood of football in the streets. I had a childhood of silence and observation in a hallowed hall where kings and movie stars came to be made whole. I learned at my father's knee and later at Gianluca's. I was not a client. I was an apprentice. I started by sweeping the floors, learning to respect the space. Then I was entrusted with the shears, the irons that weighed as much as my leg, the needles that had to be held just so. Gianluca was a stern, formidable man with eyes that missed nothing. A single crooked stitch, a lapel that was a millimeter off its line, and the entire garment would be cut from the frame and burned. There was no room for good enough. There was only perfection or there was nothing. For 10 years I lived and breathed that world. I learned that a suit is not clothing. It is architecture for the human form. It is psychology. It is armor. We didn't just measure a man's chest and inseam. We studied the slope of his shoulders, the way he stood when he was confident, the way he shrank when he was insecure. We built a shell that would amplify his best self, that would give him the courage to walk into any room and own it. I worked on suits for princes and presidents, for titans of industry and legends of the silver screen. I saw men transformed not by the cloth, but by the intention and the mastery woven into every single thread. And the suit Chloe mocked so viciously at that party. This charcoal grey wool she called cheap. This is one of the last pieces I ever made. I made it for myself, in the final year of my apprenticeship, under Gianluca's final critical eye. He was retiring. My father had passed. I was at a crossroads. I spent 3 months on that suit alone. The wool is a Super 150 from a mill in Biella that has supplied cloth to tailors for 200 years. It's not flashy. Its luxury is in its understatement, in its incredible drape and resilience. The canvas is all horsehair, stitched by my own hand. The buttons are horn from a specific breed of water buffalo, each one selected for its unique, subtle grain. I remember Gianluca standing behind me, his silence more powerful than any critique I was hand-stitching the lining, the pick-stitching along the lapel. My hands were trembling. This was my masterpiece, my final exam. He watched for a full 20 minutes, not saying a word. Finally, he placed a hand on my shoulder, a rare gesture. "Bene, Arturo," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It is perfect. Now you are a tailor." A week later, I met Eleanor at a cafe near the Spanish Steps. She was an American student, all bright eyes and laughter, so entirely separate from the world of hushed reverence and exacting precision. I had known she saw the man, not the suit. With her, I didn't need the armor. I wanted to be just a man. I left that life behind. I came to America, became a husband, a father, a grandfather. I put the shears away. I buried that person deep, a secret I shared only with Eleanor. It was a past life, a ghost. But when I wear this suit, I feel it. I feel the weight of that approval, the memory of my father's pride, the scent of the atelier. It is a touchstone to a man they have never met. To them, it's just an old suit. To me, it is a testament to a lifetime of discipline, a legacy of silent, impeccable power. And to hear it dismissed so casually, so cruelly, by someone who wouldn't know true craftsmanship if it bit her, it doesn't make me angry. Not yet. It just makes the silence within me feel a little deeper, a little heavier. The ghost is stirring. The birthday party should have been the end of it. A moment of petty cruelty, a spark in the dark that would fizzle and die. I am, by nature, a man who prefers peace. I thought silence and a dignified bearing would be my answer, that Chloe would see my lack of reaction and move on to some other project. But I had misjudged the nature of her ambition. For her, my quietness wasn't a rebuke. It was an invitation. It was a vacuum she was all too eager to fill. It began with a gift. A box arrived at my door, wrapped in obnoxiously bright paper. Inside was a polo shirt. It was a synthetic blend, the color of a sickly orange, with a logo embroidered on the chest so large it was practically a billboard. The stitching was sloppy, the fabric thin and destined to pill after a single wash. It was, in every sense of the word, an insult. But the insult wasn't in the shirt itself. It was in the note that accompanied it. "Thought you could use an upgrade, Dad. Time to step into this century. Love, Chloe." So she brought the next one over in person. A pair of trousers in a garish electric blue, cut so poorly they bagged at the knee and were tight at the waist. She stood in my living room, beaming with a kind of missionary zeal. "Go on, try them on. Let's see the transformation," she chirped. I felt a cold stone settle in my gut. This wasn't a gift, it was a costume. She was trying to dress me as her version of what an old man should be. Loud, harmless, and utterly without his own voice. To keep the peace, to avoid a scene with David, I took the trousers to my bedroom. Standing before the mirror, I looked at the distorted reflection. The fabric felt cheap and abrasive against my skin, a far cry from the soft, breathable wools I was accustomed to. I looked like a caricature. When I emerged, she clapped her hands together. "Perfect, see, so much better than that dreary old suit." Then came the photographs. I didn't understand the world of social media, not really. A scene of perfect domestic peace that was about to be shattered. "The man has the taste of a barnacle," she said, and she laughed again, a sound that was now utterly devoid of warmth. Stuck in the past, clinging to the same tired, frumpy look for decades. It's a miracle my husband turned out so well. Honestly, I'm basically doing a public service, rebranding him from the ground up. It's the ultimate testament to the power of a curated lifestyle. Each word was a tiny, precise incision, but it wasn't the insult itself that cut deepest. I was a 72-year-old man. I'd been called worse by better. It wasn't even the sheer ingratitude, the willful blindness to a lifetime of quiet support. It was the transaction. She was on the phone with a client a potential sponsor, a collaborator. She was pitching her brand, her vision, her expertise, and she was using me as the before picture. She was building her platform, her influence, her income on the foundation of my supposed inadequacy. She was monetizing my humiliation. The before and after photos on her social media had been galling. The patronizing gifts of cheap, garish clothing had been insulting. The whispered suggestions to David about my mental state had been a violation. But this was different. This was cold. This was calculated. This wasn't just a daughter-in-law being catty or cruel. This was a businesswoman leveraging a family member's dignity for a profit margin. And in that crystalline moment, something shifted inside me. It wasn't a surge of hot, blinding rage. It was something far more dangerous, far more permanent. It was a click, a deep, resonant, final click, like a perfectly crafted lock sliding into place. The lion is awake. The thought didn't form in words so much as it settled in my bones, a low, primal hum of energy that replaced the weary acceptance I had carried for months. The quiet old man, the harmless relic, the clueless father-in-law, that persona she had so carefully constructed for me, shattered into a million silent pieces I saw, with a clarity that was almost frightening, the entire battlefield. It wasn't a battlefield of shouting matches or slammed doors. It was a battlefield of perception, of taste, of unassailable, quiet authority. It was the world she pretended to understand, the world she used as a prop for her own fragile ego. And it was a world I had helped build. I thought of the suit hanging in my closet, the one she had mocked at the birthday party, the charcoal grey wool. I thought of my father's hands, gnarled and strong, guiding the fabric. I heard Gianluca's voice, not as a distant memory, but as a clear, present instruction in my mind. A suit is not clothing, Arthur. It is armor. It is a statement of intent without a single word spoken. My intent in that moment became as sharp and as defined as a surgeon's scalpel. I would not yell. I would not plead. I would not engage her on her own tawdry, social media-obsessed level. I would speak the only language that truly mattered in her chosen arena, the language of legacy, the language of mastery. I would show her what a barnacle truly was, an organism that clings to a surface, deriving its identity from something greater, something it can never truly comprehend. And I would show her the rock to which she had so foolishly attached herself. I finally set the glass of water down on the counter. The sound it made was soft, definitive. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade away. The only sound was the steady, determined beat of my own heart. The game was on, and for the first time in a very long time, I was no longer a passive player. I was the master of it. The door to my study clicked shut, and for the first time all day, the world fell away. The polite, slightly distant smile I'd worn at David's party melted from my face, leaving behind only the quiet truth of the room, my sanctuary. Here there were no curated photo opportunities, no performative concern, no Chloe, just the scent of old leather from my armchair, the faint, clean aroma of lemon oil from the bookshelves, and the weight of the silence. My fingers, which had felt so stiff and old just moments before, found their way to the lapel of my jacket. They didn't fumble or tremble. They knew this terrain. They traced the line of the lapel, the gentle roll of the fabric, and then they found it, the pick stitching, each tiny, perfect, nearly invisible stitch, done by my own hand more than 2 decades ago. My thumb brushed over them back and forth, a blind man reading a sacred text. It was flawless, not a single thread out of place, the tension perfect, the line as straight as a rule. It was a language Chloe and her world of fast fashion and faster opinions would never understand. And as I touched it, the present dissolved. I was no longer Arthur, the 72-year-old widower, the slightly embarrassing father-in-law, I was a young man again, 23, standing in a pool of golden Italian light that streamed through the high-arched windows of a workshop in Milan. The air was thick, not with perfume, but with the honest, profound smells of the craft, the rich, oily scent of virgin wool, the sweet, waxy perfume of beeswax from the threads, the faint, metallic tang of shears and needles. The silence in that atelier was a living thing. It wasn't empty. It was full of concentration, of purpose. The only sounds were the soft shush of a bristle brush on cloth, the gentle thud of an iron on its stand, and the whisper of silk thread being pulled through canvas. And then his voice, Gianluca, il maestro. It wasn't a loud voice, but it carried through the quiet like a low bell, each word weighted with a lifetime of knowledge. Arthur, he said, his shadow falling over the sleeve I was working on. I froze, my needle poised. He never raised his voice in criticism. His disapproval was a palpable stillness. He reached out, his own fingers, gnarled and strong from 60 years of work. Touching the seam I had just basted, too much haste, he murmured. You are not assembling a car, boy. You are building a second skin, a soul for the cloth. He took the needle from my hand, his movements fluid and certain. Watch. He didn't just sew, he performed a kind of alchemy. The needle became an extension of his will, the thread a line of thought. A suit, he continued, his eyes never leaving his work, is not clothing. It is a shell of confidence. It is armor for the battles of boardrooms and ballrooms. But more than that, it is a statement of intent. Not with a shout, Arthur never with a shout, but with a whisper so quiet, so assured, that only those who know how to listen will hear it. It says, I respect myself, I respect the occasion, I understand the unspoken rules. It is a declaration without a single word ever being spoken. I remember the heat in my cheeks, the sting of his quiet correction. But it was a sting that bred perfection. It was a lesson in humility and power, intertwined. He was teaching me that true mastery wasn't about being seen as the best. It was about the silent private knowledge that you had done the work, that you had honored the material, that you had achieved something that transcended trend and time. My fingers stilled on the lapel of my suit. The memory faded, but the lesson remained, etched into my very bones. The anger I had felt at the party, the hot, humiliated flush, was gone. In its place was something far colder, far more potent, a cold, precise clarity. Chloe lived in a world of surfaces, of loud, empty declarations on social media, of likes and shares, and the fleeting approval of strangers. She thought style was a label, a price tag, a cruel comment delivered for laughs. She had tried to dress me in her world's cheap armor, and she had mocked the one I wore, the one I had forged myself in the fires of true craftsmanship. She had no idea what she was playing with. The plan didn't form in a rush of emotion. It unfolded in my mind like a bolt of the finest cloth, each step measured and cut with the same precision. I had learned at Gianluca's knee I would not shout, I would not post, I would not engage in her petty public war of words. That was her battlefield, and I would not meet her there. No, I would use the very world she pretended to understand, the world of true style, of heritage, of unassailable silent authority. To dismantle her, I would show her what power really looked like. Not the loud, frantic power of influence, but the quiet, immovable power of truth. The power of a legacy she couldn't buy, a history she couldn't fabricate, and a mastery she could never, in 1,000 lifetimes, comprehend. I would let the armor speak for itself, and it would tell a story that would shatter her world. The click had happened. The lion was awake, but a predator doesn't roar, it stalks. My plan needed to be as precise and elegant as the single needle stitching on a Valenti lapel. It couldn't be born of the hot, messy emotion Chloe thrived on. It had to be cold, factual, and utterly devastating. The first step was conducted in the quiet of my study, the scent of old leather and paper, a familiar comfort. I unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk, not for the first time since Eleanor passed, but this time with a different purpose. I wasn't seeking solace in memories, I was arming myself. My old leather-bound address book was a time capsule filled with names and numbers from a life I had deliberately left behind. My fingers, still steady despite their age, found the entry, Isabella Rossi. Isabella. She had been a fiery young journalist from a Milanese fashion magazine. When she first came to the atelier, all sharp questions and an even sharper eye, Gianluca had been charmed by her intelligence and had allowed her unprecedented access. Over the years, she became a friend, a confidant, and one of Valenti's most loyal clients. Now, David had tried to explain it to me once, calling it a digital scrapbook, but I soon learned it was something far more potent and far more dangerous. It was a stage, and I was an unwilling actor in Chloe's one-woman play. The first time I saw one, David showed me on his phone. It was a side-by-side picture. On the left, a photo of me from the birthday party, standing tall in my charcoal grey suit. The caption underneath it read, "Project Dad, before, stuck in a time warp." On the right, a photo of me she must have snapped secretly in my own home, wearing the hideous orange polo. I looked uncomfortable, my posture slightly slumped, the harsh flash washing me out. The caption, "After, a splash of color and a modern fit. A work in progress, but we're getting there. Hashtag family glow up. Style rescue." The comments below were a torrent of emojis and praise for her. "You're an angel for doing this," one read. "OMG, he looks so much happier," said another. My blood ran cold. She wasn't just mocking me privately anymore. She was constructing a narrative for an audience of thousands, painting me as a pathetic, out-of-touch old man, whom she, the benevolent and stylish savior, was patiently rehabilitating. My dignity, my quiet self-possession, was being packaged and sold as content to bolster her lifestyle brand. Each before photo was a deliberate misrepresentation, a theft of my identity. Each after was a lie, a forced performance of gratitude I did not feel. The humiliation was a constant low-grade fever now, but the true escalation, the move that shifted this from a war of aesthetics to a battle for my very self, happened when I overheard a conversation between her and David. They thought I was napping in my armchair in the den, but I was merely resting my eyes, their voices carried from the kitchen. "I'm just worried, David," Chloe said, her voice laced with a false, syrupy concern that set my teeth on edge. "It's not just the clothes, it's a general disengagement, a lack of care about his surroundings. At his age, that can be an early sign, you know. My friend Sarah's father started wearing mismatched socks, and then they found out he'd been forgetting to pay his bills for months." I could hear the hesitation in my son's voice. "Dad's always been particular about his clothes, Chloe, and he's sharp as a tack with his finances." "But how do we know?" she pressed, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He's so stubborn, so private. Maybe it would give us all peace of mind if we just had a look. You could become a co-signer on his accounts, just to be safe, for his own good." The silence from David was deafening, and in that silence I felt the final boundary being crossed. This was no longer about a suit. It was no longer about public shaming on her little digital stage. She was now making a direct assault on my competence, my sanity, and my autonomy. She was using the image she had crafted of me, the frumpy, cognitively declining old man, as a weapon to strip me of my independence, to have my son, my own flesh and blood, review my finances as if I were a child who couldn't be trusted. The disrespect had metastasized. It had moved from the surface of my skin to the core of my being. She wasn't just trying to change my clothes. She was trying to dismantle my life, piece by piece, and rebuild it in her own shallow, controlling image. And in that moment, lying perfectly still in my chair, the cold stone in my gut turned to ice. The game had changed entirely. The house was quiet, or as quiet as it ever got. The low, persistent hum of the refrigerator, the distant tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. These were the sounds of my solitude, the white noise of a life lived largely in my own head. Since Eleanor passed, I was in the kitchen pouring myself a glass of water, the simple cool weight of the glass a small comfort. The patio doors were open a crack, just enough to let in the evening air. And that's how her voice reached me. It was Chloe's, that bright, artificially polished tone she used for business, a voice that carried the faint, metallic ring of ambition. She was on the patio, her back to the house, her phone pressed to her ear. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop. It was an accident of acoustics and an open door. Absolutely, she was saying, a laugh like tinkling glass. The core philosophy is about potential, seeing the diamond in the rough. I took a slow sip of water, the liquid doing nothing to ease the sudden dryness in my throat. I knew, with a cold, sinking certainty, where this was going. I had become a topic, a case study. Think of it as my personal challenge, she continued, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial, yet still performative whisper. My father-in-law. There it was, my title, reduced to a setup for a punchline. I stood frozen, the glass in my hand feeling suddenly heavy as a stone. The evening light was soft and golden, catching the dust motes, dancing in the... was the head curator of a world-renowned fashion museum in New York. A respected pillar of the industry Chloe so desperately wanted to belong to. I composed the email with the same care I once used to cut a pattern. No sentimentality, no pleas for help, just facts. I provided Chloe's social media handle and a brief, unadorned summary of her public campaign. The mocking of my suit, the before and after posts, the suggestion of my cognitive decline, the monetization of my humiliation. I didn't need to tell Isabella that the suit she was mocking was a Valenti. I knew she would recognize it instantly. I ended the email with a simple line. I believe this constitutes a misuse of Gianluca's legacy. I hit send. The digital whisper flew across the world. I didn't wait for a reply. I knew Isabella. Her sense of justice, especially when it came to the sanctity of true craftsmanship, was absolute. The trap was set. Her public call-out was swift and brutal. From her museum's official account, a platform with 10 times the reach of Chloe's, she issued a statement. She didn't mention me by name, protecting my privacy with the discretion of the old world, but she eviscerated Chloe's brand for its profound lack of authenticity and its crass exploitation of the elderly for commercial clout. The fashion world, which had mostly ignored Chloe, now took notice. The whispers began. Simultaneously, I prepared for the family dinner. This was the second movement of my symphony. From the archival garment bag in my closet, I withdrew not just a suit, but a piece of history. It was a three-piece in a subtle, moss-green herringbone, woven from a vintage Loro Piana, wool so fine, it felt like dense air. I had made it in the early 80s for a European statesman who needed to project both power and approachability at a historic summit. The silhouette was soft-shouldered, a Valenti signature, but the structure beneath was ironclad. Every seam, every buttonhole was a testament to 1,000 hours of practice under Gianluca's exacting eye. I dressed slowly, ritualistically. The trousers fell with a clean, sharp break. The waistcoat hugged my frame perfectly, even after all these years. The jacket settled on my shoulders like a second skin. Looking in the mirror, I wasn't an old man playing dress-up. I was Arthur, the craftsman. The armor was back on. The dinner was at David and Chloe's. The air was thick with the tension from Isabella's public shaming. Chloe was brittle, her smile a tight, painted-on thing. Her eyes scanned me as I entered, and I saw the familiar flicker of dismissal, quickly followed by a new, uncertain hesitation. She couldn't place the suit, but some deep, untrained part of her recognized its authority. "Another vintage find, Dad?" she finally said, her voice dripping with a forced lightness. "It's very green, quite a statement." I simply smiled, a small, quiet thing. "It's comfortable," I said, and took my seat at the table. I let the garment speak. I spoke of the grandchildren's school projects, of the weather I was a placid lake, and my suit was the impossible depth beneath the surface. She couldn't leave it alone. The arrogance that had built her brand was now its fatal flaw. As coffee was served, she circled back, her voice louder, needing an audience. "Really, David, look at the cut. It's so boxy, and that color. It's like something a retired banker would wear to fade into the wallpaper." That was my cue. The final piece of the mechanism clicked into place. "I think it has a certain presence," I said, my voice calm. "In fact, I was just telling a friend about it, a journalist. He's fascinated by classic tailoring. He's in the neighborhood. I hope you don't mind, but I invited him to stop by for an informal chat." Before Chloe could process this, the doorbell rang. David, confused, answered it. A man in his 40s, with a keen, appraising gaze, stepped into the foyer. He was Alessandro Moretti, a name I knew from Isabella's briefing, one of the most respected voices in haute couture journalism. His eyes swept the room, a professional habit, and then they landed on me, on the suit. The change was instantaneous. His casual demeanor evaporated. He stopped dead, his head tilting slightly like a safecracker listening for a tumble. He took a step closer, then another, his focus absolute. He didn't greet Chloe or David. His world had shrunk to the weave of the cloth, the curve of the lapel, the line of the sleeve. "My God," he breathed, the words barely audible. He reached out a hand, stopping just short of touching the fabric, a gesture of pure reverence. His face was a canvas of stunned disbelief. That's impossible." The room was silent. The trap was sprung. The final reveal was now only a breath away. The silence in the room became a physical presence, thick and heavy. It was the kind of quiet I remembered from the atelier, the sacred hush that fell when a master was examining a piece, his eyes seeing not just the fabric, but the soul of the work. Only this time, the master wasn't Gianluca. He was the journalist, a man named Julian Croft, who Isabella had assured me was the most respected and feared voice in modern couture journalism. He had arrived exactly on time, a man of quiet intensity with eyes that missed nothing. The dinner had been a strained affair. Chloe had been performing as always, holding court with stories of her brand's latest vision, her voice a little too loud, her laughter a little too sharp. She had, of course, noticed the suit I was wearing the moment I walked in. It was a three-piece in a subtle, almost black herringbone, a fabric so rare it no longer existed. "Oh, Dad," she had sighed, a performative mix of pity and exasperation. "Another hand-me-down. You really do have a collection of these old relics, don't you? We really must get you into this century." David had shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but said nothing. I had simply given a small, non-committal nod and taken my place at the table. Now the plates were cleared, and Julian was there, his presence explained as a friend of a friend interested in local history. But his gaze kept drifting back to me, to the drape of the jacket, the roll of the lapel. He finally couldn't contain his professional curiosity any longer. "Arthur," he began, his voice respectful, but edged with a hunter's focus. "Forgive my impertinence, but that suit you're wearing, it's extraordinary. The line, the construction, it has the hallmarks of a Valenti, a very early one if I'm not mistaken. From his heroic period, we call it the late 70s, perhaps? I remained still, my hands resting on the arms of my chair. You have a good eye, He leaned forward, in his dinner forgotten. May I? He asked, gesturing to the suit. I gave a single slow nod. He approached not like a man looking at a garment, but like a scholar approaching a holy text. He didn't touch it at first. He just looked, his eyes tracing the lines. Then, with a reverence I hadn't seen in decades, he gently lifted the lapel. He was looking for the signature. Gianluca never used labels. His signature was in the construction. A specific hidden pick stitch along the inner edge of the lapel, a sequence of 3 long stitches followed by 2 impossibly short ones, a code known only to his inner circle and the most obsessive of collectors. Julian's breath caught. He had found it. And the cloth, he murmured, almost to himself. He took a small elegant loop from his pocket and examined the weave of the wool. This is the storm cloud herringbone. Loro Piana, 1978. They made less than 50 meters of it. It was reserved exclusively for Valenti's most important commissions. He straightened up, his face a mask of pure awe. This is the suit, the one made for the British Foreign Secretary for the Camp David Accords. It was documented, but it vanished from the public record. It's considered one of the lost masterpieces. He turned to me, his expression one of utter confusion. Arthur, how do you come to possess this? This isn't just a suit, this is a piece of history. The room was utterly silent. David was staring, his brow furrowed. Chloe had a faint, condescending smile plastered on her face, waiting for me to spin some sad story about a thrift store or a deceased uncle. I let the silence stretch for one more second, letting the weight of Julian's discovery settle in the room. Then I slowly turned my head. I didn't look at Julian. I looked directly at Chloe. My gaze was steady, my voice was low and calm, devoid of anger or triumph. It was simply a statement of fact, a truth that had been waiting decades to be spoken. I didn't acquire it, I said, each word clear and measured. I made it. I saw her smile falter, just a tremor at the corner of her mouth. My father and I continued, my eyes locked on hers, were the hands behind Il Maestro for 30 years. We were the ones who cut the cloth, who set the sleeves, who perfected the silhouette that defined an era. Gianluca Valenti was the vision, the genius. But he was also my mentor and my friend. The color did not just drain from Chloe's face, it vanished, as if siphoned away by some invisible force, leaving behind a mask of stark, bloodless white. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The foundation of her entire world, a world built on the shallow soil of trends, influencer deals, and the perceived authority to pass judgment, didn't just crack, it collapsed. It imploded. The very relic she had mocked, the clueless old man she had used as a punchline to sell handbags and scarves, was the living embodiment of the artistry she could only ever pretend to understand. The silence that followed was no longer just quiet. It was the sound of a persona shattering into a million unrecognizable pieces. The silence in my house was different now. It wasn't the quiet of loneliness I'd grown accustomed to since Eleanor passed. This was a deep, resonant silence, the kind that settles after a great storm has passed, leaving the air cleansed and the landscape irrevocably changed. My phone, which had been a source of such anxiety during Chloe's campaign, now sat dormant. The frantic pings of her social media notifications, the condescending texts about my next style intervention, they were gone, evaporated. In their place was a profound and, I admit, a deeply satisfying peace. The story broke, as Isabella had assured me it would, in The Cut and Women's Wear Daily. The headlines were variations on a theme. Influencer's empire crumples as frumpy father-in-law revealed as a Valenti legend. I didn't need to read the articles. Isabella had sent me the links with a simple message. Justice, my old friend. Gianluca would be proud. I closed the laptop. The validation wasn't in the pixels on a screen. It was in the new quality of the silence around me. The fallout was swift and merciless, a testament to the fickleness of the world Chloe had so desperately wanted to rule. Her phone, I learned later from David, became a vortex of panic. The calls weren't coming in. They were going out, frantic, pleading calls to sponsors and PR firms that were no longer taking her calls. The lifestyle brand, built on a foundation of perceived superiority and curated authenticity, was revealed to be a house of cards, and the revelation of my past was a hurricane. The sponsorship deals, the collaborations, the promised book deal, they vanished overnight, their cancellation clauses invoked with cold corporate efficiency. Her social media following, that fickle army of hundreds of thousands she had marshaled to mock me, dissolved. They didn't just unfollow, they turned. The comment sections became a digital graveyard for her credibility, filled with accusations of fraud and, the ultimate insult in her world, having no taste. Watching my son navigate this was the most complex part of the aftermath. His initial reaction was one of pure, unadulterated shock. He came to my house the day the story broke, his face pale, a printed article crumpled in his fist. "Dad, is any of this true?" he stammered, holding out the paper as if it were in a foreign language. "All of it, David," I said, my voice calm. I was sitting in my wingback chair, a cup of tea steaming gently beside me. Every word. He sank onto the sofa, the fight gone out of him. He looked like a little boy whose entire understanding of the world had been upended. He knew me as Dad, the retired man who putted in the garden, who told bad jokes, who missed his wife. He had no framework for Arthur, the apprentice to a tailoring titan, the man whose hands had crafted garments for men who shaped history. The shock, however, soon curdled into a slow-burning, righteous fury. It wasn't directed at me, but at the elaborate fiction his wife had constructed. He began connecting the dots I had long seen, the before pictures she took without my full consent, her whispered suggestions about my mental state, her systematic campaign to paint me as incompetent to elevate herself. He saw the manipulation not just of me, but of him. She had used his father as a prop, and in doing so, she had made a fool of him too. His confrontation with Chloe was not something he shared with me in detail, and I did not press. A man's marriage is his own country, and I am no invader. But he came to me afterward, his jaw set, and told me he had demanded they enter marriage counseling immediately. "She built her whole life on a lie, Dad," he said, his voice thick with a pain that went deeper than embarrassment. "She didn't just disrespect you, she disrespected us, our name, this family." There was a new hardness in his eyes, a resolve that had been absent before. The scales had fallen from them, and he was finally seeing the woman he married with clear, unflinching vision. The dynamic in our family shifted, not with a dramatic declaration, but with a quiet, seismic correction. The next Sunday dinner was a subdued affair. Chloe was there, a ghost of her former self, dressed in a simple, unadorned dress. The performative vivacity was gone, replaced by a palpable shame. She didn't speak unless spoken to, and she couldn't meet my eyes. David was quieter, more thoughtful, but he sat closer to me, his posture protective. He asked me about my father, about the atelier in Milan, questions he had never thought to ask in 40 years. He was seeing me, truly seeing me, for the first time. My authority was restored, but it wasn't the authority of a patriarch who had won a battle. It was the quiet, unassailable authority of truth I had not raised my voice. I had not issued ultimatums. I had simply revealed a part of myself that had always been there, waiting in the weave of the wool and the precision of a stitch. They had mistaken my silence for emptiness, my patience for passivity. Now they understood. The strength I possessed wasn't the kind that needed to shout to be heard. It was the kind that could wait decades for the perfect moment to speak. And when it did, its whisper could topple empires. The lion had not roared, he had simply opened his eyes, and the jungle fell silent. The dust has settled now, not with a dramatic crash, but with a quiet, gentle descent, like the finest wool fibers after a good brushing. 6 months. It feels both like a lifetime and the blink of an eye. The house is quiet again, the way I prefer it, but the quality of the silence has changed. It's no longer the silence of absence, of Eleanor being gone, or of a family that saw me as part of the furniture. It's a peaceful, earned silence, the kind you get after a hard day's work, when you can finally sit and appreciate what you've built. I see Chloe sometimes, when David brings the grandchildren over. She waits in the car now. She doesn't come to the door. There's a humility about her that wasn't there before, a quietness that feels less like a punishment and more like a necessary recalibration. She's trying to rebuild, I'm told, a small local job, something with real substance, away from the glaring, fickle spotlight of social media. I don't wish her ill. The lesson was administered, and it was severe. Her entire world, the one she built on such a fragile foundation of perception and pretense, collapsed in a single afternoon. You don't kick a person when they're already down. You just make sure the ground beneath your own feet is solid. David, my son, he comes over more often now, just him and the kids. We sit in the backyard and he talks, really talks. Not about the weather or the news, but about things that matter. He's furious with her, of course, for the manipulation, for the way she tried to paint me as a doddering old fool to further her own brand, but he's also furious with himself, for not seeing it, for not stopping it. I tell him not to be. A masterfully constructed illusion is meant to fool the eye. It's why we use basting stitches. They hold the illusion in place until the permanent work is done. He's set firm boundaries with Chloe. They're in therapy, trying to stitch the marriage back together with stronger thread. It's a difficult, painstaking process, like reweaving a damaged section of cloth. I watch him navigate it with a grim determination I recognize, and I feel a quiet pride. He's learning his own strength. My own routine has found a new, gentle rhythm. Mornings are for coffee and the newspaper. Afternoons are often for a long walk. But the best parts of my week are the unexpected ones. Like when Isabella Rossi comes to visit. She'll breeze in, always with a small, perfect pastry and a story about the latest drama in the museum world. We sit in my study, surrounded by the ghosts of our shared past, and we talk about Gianluca. We talk about the time a certain Hollywood star threw a fit over the width of his lapel, or the way the light used to fall through the high windows of the Milan atelier in the late afternoon, illuminating the dust motes dancing above the bolts of silk. We speak of my father, his gnarled, knowing hands. With Isabella, I don't have to explain anything. She knows the language. She understands that a single piece of canvas interlining can tell a story of structure and support that lasts for decades. And sometimes on these quiet afternoons, after she's gone, I feel the pull. I'll go to the cedar-lined closet in the spare room and take out the old leather-bound case. The click of the brass latches is a sound that transports me instantly. I lay out the shears, the heavy, perfectly balanced shears that Gianluca gave me when I turned 30. I run my fingers over the measuring tape, the numbers faint now from decades of use. I don't make suits for clients anymore. That part of my life is done. But I'll take a scrap of cloth, a leftover piece of cashmere, a swatch of tweed, and I'll just work. A simple hem, a practice lapel, a perfectly rolled handkerchief. It's not for anyone, it's for me. It's a form of meditation, a prayer my hands remember long after my mind has let the specifics fade. The snip of the scissors, the whisper of the thread through the cloth, the rhythmic, grounding push and pull of the needle. In these moments, there is no conflict, no pride, no past humiliations. There is only the craft, the pure, simple, joyful act of creation. The most profound change, however, has been with my grandchildren. My youngest granddaughter, Lily, she's 7. The other day, she was here and she pointed to the wardrobe where I keep my personal suits. "Grandpa," she said, her voice full of a new kind of wonder, "can I see the armor?" It took my breath away. She didn't see old clothes. She saw what Gianluca had always taught me to see. She saw the suit I wore the day her grandmother and I were married. She saw the tuxedo I crafted for a gala a lifetime ago. She sees stories now. She sees a legacy. They all do. They look at my wardrobe not with pity or embarrassment, but with awe, understanding that these pieces of cloth contain chapters of a life they never knew I lived. They run their small, careful hands over the buttons and the seams, and in their eyes I see the future. They may never pick up a needle and thread, but they are learning the most important lesson of all, that true value is never on the surface. It's in the hidden stitches, the strong foundation, the quiet strength that holds everything together, long after the noise has faded away. Remember this. It's a lesson that was carved into my soul long before it was ever tested in my own home. True class is silent. It doesn't shout, it doesn't preen, it doesn't need to broadcast itself on social media or tear others down just to feel a few inches taller. I learned that in a dusty workshop in Milan, surrounded by bolts of cloth that cost more than most people's cars, from a man who spoke more with his hands than he ever did with his mouth. Gianluca never once posted a picture of his work. He didn't have a brand. He had a reputation whispered among those who knew, a secret handshake of quality and integrity that echoed across generations. That is true stature. It's built, stitch by invisible stitch, in the dark, with no one watching. It's the quiet confidence of knowing what you are capable of without needing the world's validation to confirm it. What you saw play out in my story wasn't a revenge fantasy. It was a demonstration, a correction. Arrogance, you see, is just the mask of insecurity. It's the loud, garish costume worn by someone who is terrified that underneath they have nothing of substance to offer. Chloe needed to build her brand on the back of my supposed inadequacy, because deep down she feared her own foundation was made of sand. She had to make noise to convince herself she was heard. She had to point out my flaws to distract from her own. But a mask, no matter how cleverly painted, will always crack under the weight of the truth. And the truth has a certain weight to it, a density that cheap imitations can never hope to replicate. Genuine mastery doesn't need the spotlight. It's comfortable in the shadows. It's content to be hidden in plain sight, waiting patiently. For years I was just Dad. I was the man in the old suit, the relic to be gently mocked and pity-shopped for. And I was content with that, because my worth wasn't tied to their perception of it. The mastery was in my hands, in my memory, in the legacy I carried. It was patient. It knew that the right moment would come, not a moment of anger, but a moment of necessity, a moment where silence was no longer a virtue, but a disservice to the truth itself. And when that moment arrived, the strength it revealed wasn't new. It wasn't manufactured for the occasion. It was timeless. It was the same strength that had been there all along, woven into the very fabric of who I am. So I will leave you with this final thought, the one that guided me through the entire ordeal. Never, ever mistake a sleeping lion for a harmless old man. The world is full of people who have been quietly, diligently building their legacies, while others were busy building their profiles. They are the engineers, the artists, the craftsmen, the thinkers. They are the ones who have lived full lives and have chosen a peaceful retirement, not because they are weak, but because they have earned their rest. They do not feel the need to prove anything to anyone, but do not confuse that peace for passivity. Do not confuse their silence for emptiness. Beneath the calm exterior lies a lifetime of accumulated skill, wisdom, and a fierce, protective love for what is right and true. Provoke them at your peril. Underestimate them at your own cost. For when a sleeping lion is finally stirred to action, it is not with the frantic, noisy panic of a cornered animal. It is with the calm, terrifying, and absolute certainty of a force of nature reclaiming its territory. It doesn't need to roar to be heard. Its mere presence, once fully acknowledged, is enough to change everything. Remember that. Carry it with you. And perhaps take a closer, more respectful look at the quiet people in your own life. You might be surprised at the legends resting right in front of you.